האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dobro Vietcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Vayishlach. We're going to do the first part of Os Yud, section number 10. Section number 10 is a very long section, and so we're only going to be able to do the first part. We're also, as you're going to see, we're also going to skip over two paragraphs which delve very, very deeply into the Kabbalah, into Kabbalistic ideas. Even the piece we're going to read, as we'll see, deals with some Kabbalistic ideas, but the two paragraphs get in so deeply that it's not possible, unfortunately, for me to explain them at all on any level. So we'll skip those. But everything else that we look at, you'll see, is very, very interesting, thought-provoking, and fascinating. So let us get right into Os Yud after we look at a pasuk from our parsha. This is Perek Lamed Gimel, pasuk Yud Daled. What's happening here is that the big confrontation between Esav and Yaakov has ended peacefully, and now they're going their separate ways. And Esav offers to accompany Yaakov. Not only have things ended peacefully, Esav says, "My men and I are happy to walk along with you and to accompany you." So here's what Yaakov says, pasuk Yud Daled: Yavor no Adoni lifnei avdo. My master should please pass in front of his servant. Meaning Yaakov says to Esav, who he's referring to as my master, Esav, please pass in front of me. You go ahead first. You go with your men first. Don't wait for us. We're not going to walk together. You go ahead. Va'ani esnahalo li'iti, and I will go slowly. L'regel hamalacha, according to the regel, the feet or the walking speed of the malacha, meaning of his animals, the animals that he worked with, his flocks. Asher lefanai, that are in front of me. I'll walk more slowly. I have all of these flocks and animals. U'leregel hayiladim, and according to the walking speed of the children, I have children with me. Ad asher ovo el Adoni seira, until I come to my master, to Esav, to Seir. Now, Yaakov had no intention of coming to Seir, so Chazal discussed what he meant, but the point is that he was saying to Esav, you go ahead home to Seir, which is where you live, and I'll walk slowly, and don't wait for me, don't wait up, you just keep going, and ultimately I'll get to you in Seir. Okay, let's look right into the Zera Shimshon Os Yud. Medrash Yalkut, the Yalkut Shimoni says, Yavor no Adoni lifnei avdo, when Yaakov said the words, my master should pass on in front of his servant, you should go ahead. Omar lo, Esav had said to Yaakov, Mivakesh atah she'ehe shutaf imcha be'olamcha, do you wish for me to be a partner with you in your world? Esav had said to Yaakov, do you want me to join you and be a partner with you in your world? So when Esav said, I want to join with you and be with you, Chazal and the Medrash Yalkut Shimoni say that was Esav's way of saying, do you want me to be with you in Olam Haba, in your world, in the spiritual world? Amar lo, and so Yaakov said to Esav, Yavor no Adoni, you pass in front. Tol olamcha techila. Take your world first, meaning move ahead and go ahead and take this world and be happy with olam hazeh, with this physical world, and don't plan to join me in olam haba, in the spiritual world. Mahu es nahalo leiti. So what did Yaakov mean when he said, I will walk slowly? Amar lo, Yaakov was saying to Esav, Ad achshav yesh lefonai lasos meleches hamishkan vehamikdash. Until now, I have in front of me the mission, so to speak, of preparing the way for the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash in the world. V'zehu l'regel hamalacha asher lefonai. And that's what he was alluding to. That's what Yaakov was alluding to when he said, I'll go slowly according to the foot speed, according to the walking speed of the melacha, of the work that's in front of me. What work was he referring to? He was referring to the work of preparing the way for the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. Umahu l'regel haYeladim, and what did Yaakov mean when he said, I'll go slowly according to the walking speed of the children? Amar lo, he was saying to Esav, Ad achshav yesh li lahamid Chananya, Mishael, v'Azarya. I need to establish the future for Chananya, Mishael, v'Azarya. These were three extraordinary young men who lived in the time of Daniel and are talked about in Sefer Daniel, and they were saved from the furnace that they were thrown into for not bowing down to an idol. Shene'amar, as the Bohem, as it says regarding Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah in Sefer Daniel, Yelodim asher ein bohem kol mum. They were children or young men who had absolutely no blemish. They were flawless. Ad kan Lashono, until here is a quote from the Yalkut Shimoni. So as we're going to see, as the Zera Shimshon actually is going to ask momentarily, there's a lot going on in this little excerpt of Medrash Yalkut Shimoni. Some of it we seem able to understand, and some of it just seems hard to understand what in the world is being talked about. So the Zera Shimshon is going to ask that in his way, coming up in the next paragraph. HaMedrash hazeh omer darsheni. This excerpt from the Yalkut Shimoni Medrash says, interpret me. Meaning when you read it, you realize it can't be taken at face value. It has to be explained and interpreted in some way on a deeper level than what the words are saying. V'rabu bo hatemihos haniglos la'ein kol roeh. And there are many questions and mysteries about it which are revealed to the eye of anyone who looks at it. Whoever reads this excerpt in the Yalkut Shimoni that we just read is going to realize there's all kinds of questions. And now the Zera Shimshon is going to pose some of those questions. D'ma inyan meleches hamishkan umikdash. What is the subject matter of the work of building the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash, v'Chananya, Mishael, ve'Azariah, and mentioning Chananya, Mishael, and Azariah, three Jewish men who lived so much later in Jewish history, Lakan, to this discussion in Chumash. We have Yaakov and Esav talking to each other, and Yaakov is somehow bringing in the fact that he has to prepare the way for building the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash, and he has to prepare the way for the future existence of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. What in the world? How is that relevant in any conceivable way to the conversation he's having with Esav? Esav asked a pretty straightforward question. Yaakov, would you like my men and I to walk with you? Would you like us to accompany you? And then Yaakov gave, seemingly, in the psukim at least, in the Torah, an answer that also could be taken at face value. No, Esav, you go ahead. We would just slow you down tremendously. I have to walk slowly because of the animals and the children, the young people that are with me. You go ahead. But the Medrash takes that and turns it on its head and says somehow Esav was asking about Olam Haba and Yaakov was answering about the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That is not easy to understand. The Ode, and more so, furthermore, Ma hayisak havanoso shel Esav liskos laolam haba. What was Esav's intention? What was he thinking when he said that he wanted to join Yaakov, and meaning, according to this excerpt from the Medrash, Esav meant, I want to join you in the next world in Olam Haba. Why would Esav think that was a possibility? The next world is reserved and set aside for only the most righteous. Vihu, and he, Esav, top of the next column on the left, Russia. he was a wicked person, va'omed berisho, and he was maintaining his wickedness, meaning Esav hadn't said anything about doing tshuva and changing his life and becoming a tzaddik. Esav didn't say, Yaakov, I want to learn from you, and I'm going to send my 400 men home so I can become your student and sit and study Torah with you and learn to be a tzaddik, hopefully like you. Esav didn't say that, so why did he think he could possibly join Yaakov in Olam Haba? Umahu zesha Omer lo Yaakov, and what did Yaakov mean when he said back to Esav, Tol olamcha techila? Take your world first. Take the material world first. The Hoya lo lomar, Yaakov should have said, Tol ha'olam hazeh lechelkecha. Take this world, the material world, the physical world, as your portion. You're not going to have any share in the world to come, Esav. So enjoy this world. That's what Yaakov should have said to Esav. Umahu haloshon shel techila. What did he mean when he said to Esav, take this world first, as if Esav should take the pleasures of this world first and hope and aspire later on to be able to enjoy the next world? What sense does that make? So why is Esav talking about enjoying Olam Haba? And why is Yaakov seeming to support that idea by saying, you know what? Let's save Olam Haba for later to enjoy this world techila first. No, that's not what Yaakov should have said. There should be no first and later. He should have said, Esav, you're limited to this world. Enjoy it and take it. Don't have any thoughts and plans about the next world, about the spiritual world, about Olam Haba. So the Zera Shimshon has clearly demonstrated that there are many fundamental hard things to understand, difficult things to understand about this excerpt from the Yalkut Shimoni, and of course, in the rest of the piece, he attempts to unravel the excerpt and explain it and bring in all kinds of sources to explain it. As we mentioned in the beginning, we're only going to look at the first part of this complicated section, and even then we'll skip certain parts. But let's begin. V'yuvan b'ma shekosov b'sefer hagilgulim. And this Yalkut Shimoni excerpt can be understood by starting to look at something which is written in the Sefer Hagilgulim, which is a Kabbalistic type Sefer written by Rabbi Chaim Vital. Demasha ohav Yitzchak es Esav hu. The fact that Yitzchak loved Esav, we know the Torah tells us Yitzchak loved Esav and Rivka loved Yaakov. So one of the mysteries in the Torah is, why did Yitzchak love Esav? Wasn't Esav such a bad guy that there's no reason for Yitzchak to have loved him? Ki gam ezeh le'umazeh asah ha'elokim. It's based on a pasuk in Koheles, and a concept that we see in a pasuk in Koheles, that Hashem created this corresponding to this, meaning that purity and impurity were not created by Hashem as two totally separate forces in the world that never connect to each other, that never impact on each other, that the world of one and the world of the other can never possibly come in contact. That's not how it works. The world of purity and impurity in the world interact. There's contact. There's exchange. V'Yitzchak hu midas hagevura. Yitzchak represented the quality of gevura, of spiritual strength. It means many things, but it means in part that Yitzchak represented the concept, the idea of a person attaining spiritual accomplishments through toil, through hard work, through individual labor, not spirituality being given as a gift, not spirituality that's inherited, but rather growing and building a life of spirituality because of one's toil and work. That's what Yitzchak represented, and that's called Gevura. The Esav hu Edom. Esav is referred to as Edom. Edom represents that which is red, that which is highly impure. Hu behechal ha'elyon shel haklipa, and he was in the highest part of the forces of impurity. Sheyesh sham kitzas ha'ora, and there is a little bit of light, a little bit of enlightenment that gets through and impacts the highest level of the forces of impurity. So if you can imagine for a moment, perhaps we'll use the ocean as a metaphor. You can go so deep in the ocean that it gets completely dark and the light from the sun doesn't reach there at all. And then let's say that represents the klipa, that represents the forces of impurity. But the very top of that dark level is close enough to the part of the ocean where the light is coming down that some of the light, a little bit of the illumination from the sun, impacts and affects that very top level of the klipa, of the dark part of the ocean. So Esav was in the top part of the klipa, of the dark area of impurity, of the forces of impurity, and he was therefore a little bit impacted and affected by the light of the force of holiness in the world. Sheyesha hoil shehu samach el sof hakedusha. Esav was near the end of where holiness reaches, and there was therefore a little bit of light reaching Esav. The Yitzchak rotza lisakenes Esav, and therefore Yitzchak thought he could be misaken, he could repair Esav, he could make it so that Esav had real kedusha, had real holiness in his life. Shehu bechinas rosh shel hachitzonim. Esav is considered the head of these forces of impurity. V'zehu she'amru zichronim levracha, and this is what Chazal said, she'rosho nikbar im Yaakov. Esav's head ended up being buried with Yaakov in the Maras HaMachpelah, in the cave of Machpelah. And why is that? Because Esav's head represents the fact that a part of Esav absorbed Kedusha, absorbed holiness, touched upon and was impacted by Kedusha, by the light of holiness. Ohav oso Yitzchak, and this is the part of Esav that Yitzchak loved, that Yitzchak sensed and saw. Yitzchak sensed that Esav had a certain element of Kedusha, of holiness, and he loved that about Esav and thought that he could save Esav because of that. In other words, when Yitzchak looked at Esav, he did not see a lost cause. He did not see a Rasha Gomor, a completely wicked person who was beyond hope, who was beyond repair. And Yitzchak thought he could save Esav. Lefi shemashet soda v'lokach mehakedusha haya b'fiv. What Esav was able to trap and catch and take from holiness was in his mouth, so to speak. That's based on a pasuk about Esav where it says that Yitzchak loved him kitzayid b'fiv, because what he trapped was in his mouth. The simple meaning is that Esav would trap would trap animals and prepare them in a delicious way and give them to his father to eat. It was in his father's mouth, and that's why Yitzchak loved him, because he showed such honor and respect and took care of his father and gave him delicious food. But what's being said here is that Esav trapped holiness, that he was able to grab onto, a little bit of kedusha that he was in close proximity to, and he was able to put it in his mouth, which was in his head, and that's why his head had kedusha, and that's why his head ended up in the Maras HaMachpelah. V'zehu perush hapasuk, and this helps us understand the pasuk. Now, this is a pasuk not from our parsha, but from the beginning of the Torah, from Bereshis, where after the different the different creatures, you might say, who were involved in the sin, Adam and Chava and the Nachash, are given their punishment. So the snake is told, Hu Yeshuf Charosh, he, meaning mankind, people, will step on your head. They'll step on the snake's head. What does that mean? Shahakidusha mechatetes, holiness, the force of holiness pounds. Continuing to the next page, paragraph on the right, Rosh HaKlipa, the head of the forces of impurity, Kedei lika hakidusha shebola veheyer besocha. Why do mankind step on the head of the snake? That means the powers of purity in this world are always trying to get back the holiness that was absorbed and is apparent, is still existing in the klipa, in the forces of impurity. V'haklipa mechatetes ha'ekev shel hakedusha. And what does it mean when the pasuk says the snake will bite the ankle of the man who's trying to step on his head? It means that the forces of impurity are always grabbing at the forces of kedusha, of purity, and trying to get some of that kedusha, grab some of it and take it. Lakachas ha'or shebesocho, in order to grab the light that is within the heel of kedusha, so to speak. So what's being said here, on a very simple level, understanding these Kabbalistic ideas, and the only way I can explain them and understand them myself on the simplest, most basic level, is that, as we said in the beginning, the powers of purity and impurity in this world were put near each other. Zelu umazeh, the pasuk in Keholel said, one next to the other. And when things are next to each other, they interact. There's overlap. There's exchange. And that's what is happening here. The forces of purity are always trying to get back any kedusha that was taken by the forces of impurity called klipa, and the forces of impurity called klipa are always trying to grab more of kedusha, more of the holiness, more of the purity, more of the light. And so therefore at this, it's not a hermetically sealed border, so to speak, at this place of connection between the forces of purity and impurity, there's a battle going on, and that's the battle. And that's the battle between purity and impurity, and that's the battle between Yaakov and Esav, and that's the explanation as to why Yitzchak had hopes, strong, powerful hopes and aspirations of saving Esav, because he could see that Esav had taken some kedusha, Esav had some holiness, and Yitzchak wanted to redeem that and build upon it. And here, where Esav says to Yaakov, "I want to be with you," we can understand. Esav is saying, "I understand. I appreciate kedusha. I have a little bit. I want more." But let's get back into the text itself. So the next paragraph that starts Vizehu Perush, and the next paragraph that says Vizehu Kitzayid Befiv. Unfortunately, I need to skip. I apologize for skipping those two paragraphs, but they're beyond my ability to explain. They go deep into Kabbalistic ideas, but pick it up after that. Let's pick it up from the column on the left. Yes, we're picking it up. We're skipping those three paragraphs. We're starting from the column on the left, where it says, top of the next column, Ve'od Amru. Ve'od Amru Sham. And they also said there, Shebeleah Hayisaba Kitzas Zuhama, that Leah had a little bit of impurity. That means that Leah inherited, so to speak, a little bit of impurity from her father Lavan. Kilo nisbarara legamre. She wasn't purified completely from this zuhama, this impurity that she had inherited from Lavan. Vilachain, and therefore, hayisa ru'uya lihinase le'esav. That's why it would have been appropriate for her to marry Esav. We know that the Chazal teach us that everyone assumed that Leah would marry Esav and Rachel would marry Yaakov. That was the assumption. And that on a certain level would have been an appropriate match because Leah actually had inherited a certain amount of impurity that had not worked its way, so to speak, out of her system, whereas Rachel had been purified of that, was free of that impurity, and so she was the perfect mate for Yaakov. But Leah was a more fitting mate for Esav. Ella, but she'al yidei dimoseha niskana. Through her tears, she was repaired. Through Leah's constant crying about possibly having to marry Esav, she purified herself from this residual impurity. V'nishara Dina b'makoma lihinase la'esav, and her daughter Dina then remained in her place, in her stead, to marry Esav. So once Leah was able to free herself from marrying Esav and was able to marry Yaakov Avinu, and so Yaakov ends up with both Leah and Rachel, and of course Bilhah and Zilpah as well. But he marries both of the daughters. Then Dinah, Leah's daughter, becomes the appropriate bride for Esav. Ela Yaakov Tamna Bateva. But Chazal tell us that Yaakov hid Dinah in a box. He would not let her meet Esav. He would not let Esav meet her. He wanted to prevent that match. Yaakov aleha, and Yaakov was punished over this, over his hiding of Dinah away from Esav. Kimosha Amru, as Chazal say, Ki ru'uya elav. Dinah was an appropriate wife, could have been an appropriate wife for Esav. V'al yoda hayaniskan gamhu, and he could have been repaired. He could have been spiritually rehabilitated through a marriage to Dinah, sha'adayin hayubo nitzotze kedusha, because there were still, after all these years, there were still sparks of holiness and kedusha in Esav, and those sparks could have been fanned, so to speak, and could have grown and taken lit Esav aflame with Kedusha had he been allowed to marry Dinah. But Yaakov did not want that to happen, and Yaakov took steps to prevent that from happening, and Dinah did not marry Esav. Ad kan Lashono, until here, is a quote from the, I believe that's the quote from the Bereshis Rabbah, which is the last thing Zera Shimshon quoted. Next paragraph. Ubazen novo levayer hamedrash. After we've explained all of these different ideas and concepts, we can go back and try to begin to understand the excerpt from the first paragraph from the Medrash Yalkut Shimoni. Shehine Esav hayeroeh shedas Yaakov hayisa lahashkiso. Esav saw and understood that Yaakov's intention was to destroy him spiritually. Esav understood that Yaakov wanted him, Esav, to be completely destroyed spiritually, to have no spiritual existence, just to be a purely material and live in the physical world without any spirituality. V'lito mimenu kol hakedusha shehayu salo, and to take away from him all holiness that he had. Kedichsi v'yodo ochezes ba'akev Esav. When the little babies Yaakov and Esav were born, it says that Yaakov's hand was grasping the heel of Esav, and this was symbolized the fact that Yaakov was trying to pull out of Esav all of the kedusha, every vestige of holiness that Esav had been able to acquire. Kedichsiv, as it said, v'chanizkar la'el, as was stated before. V'gam toman dina bateva, and Yaakov also hid Dinah in a box. That shows he wanted to prevent Esav from having any chance of doing tshuva and having a spiritual life. If Yaakov hadn't done that, Dinah could have brought Esav back to leading a good spiritual life. And Yaakov wanted to prevent that from happening. And Esav knew that Yaakov wanted to prevent that. V'chein isa b'zohar chodosh. So it states in Zohar Chodosh, shesheva hishtachavoos shehishtachav Yaakov leEsav. The 7 times that Yaakov bowed down to Esav when they first met, when they first re-met, when they first came together again, Esav and his 400 men encountered Yaakov and his family and servants and animals, and the Torah tells us Yaakov bowed 7 times as he approached Esav. Levatel sheva roshin shel hanochosh. Those 7 bows were to nullify the 7 heads of the snake, meaning the snake represents the klipa, the powers of impurity, the lo yikrav lemakdisha. So they shouldn't come close to holiness. Tahainu lachtof mimenu kol nitzotze hakedusha. It means that Yaakov was making an effort to take away every spark of kedusha from Esav. Shelo yikrav o likach shum ha'ora mehakedusha, so that Esav could no longer take any illumination, shekvar hoyulo barosho, that he already had in his head, kenizkar le'el, as we mentioned previously. So Yaakov Avinu is doing everything he can. Yaakov views his mission to do everything he can to have a clear split and dividing line between himself and Esav. Esav, you're totally part of the world of impurity, and therefore all you can aspire to is olam hazeh, is the pleasures of this world, nothing to do with spirituality and the pleasures of olam haba, of the next world. And Yaakov was trying to make sure that that's how this things developed. V'lochein, and therefore, next paragraph, Amar lo Esav, Esav said to Yaakov, Lomo atarotze likach mimeni kol hakedusha ulahashchisani. Esav said, why are you trying to totally destroy me and take away all the little bit of holiness that I have? V'halo, is it not true, im lo yeh li shum nitzot shel kedusha hakedusha, if I am not left with at least a little spark of holiness, efshar li lachios ba'olam hazeh, it'll be impossible for me to live in this world. As the Kabbalistic writers write, al ha-pasuk, on the pasuk in Nehemiah, ve'ata mechayeh es kulam, and you give life to all of them, meaning that Hashem, for anything to live in this world, there has to be some nitzot shel kedusha, some spark of holiness. And that's what Esav was saying to Yaakov. Are you trying to make it that I can't survive? I literally can't live in this world, because to live in this world, I need a little bit of kedusha, and you're trying to take it all away from me. El etzorech ani lo mus, take it from miyad. You're going to take all my holiness away, and therefore I'm going to die immediately. Ve'im amus ba'olam hazeh, and if I die before my time in this world, she'eni nenem imenu, and I don't get the pleasure that I'm destined to get from this world, bal korchach tzorech she'yeh li chelek ba'olam haba, then against your will, Yaakov, my brother, I'm going to need to get a portion in the world to come. If you deprive me of this world and make it so I die before my time and I can't benefit as I'm supposed to from olam hazeh, guess what? It's going to backfire, and I'm going to have to be given, against your will, a portion with you in the next world. Vizehu, and this is what Esav meant. Mevakesh ato she'ehei, do you actually want that I, continuing next page on the right, shutaf imcha be'olamcha, that I will be a partner with you in your world, in the next world? Do you really want that? Zebevadai lo tirtzeh. Esav says, I know for sure you don't want that. Ve'im kain, and if so, yoser tov lecha, it will be better for you. Shetaniach li hanitzotz sheyesh li. Esav says to Yaakov, leave me the little bit of holiness and kedusha that I have. Ubezeh echyeh ve'esadein ba'olam hazeh, and through that little bit of kedusha that I have, if you leave it with me, I can live and get pleasure in this world. V'chol ha'olam haba yiyeh shelcha, and the whole next world will be all yours, Esav says to Yaakov. I know that's what you want. Ve'od, and more so, im taniach li hakedusha yisraba zechuscha. If you leave me holiness, a little bit of holiness, it'll be a great merit for you. Shemachmas kedusha zo, because of this holiness, efshar she'echzor lemutav. Maybe I'll do tshuva. Maybe that little bit of kedusha will help me come back and lead a good life. Ve'ezke l'chay olam habon. I'll be able to enjoy olam merit, being an olam haba on my own rights, based on my own performances, because I'll do tshuva and become a good person like Yaakov, like you. So Esav is making a very strong case to Yaakov to allow, for Yaakov to allow Esav to keep the kedusha, the holiness that he already has, and not to try and deprive him of it completely. Next paragraph. Omar lo. So now Yaakov responds to Esav, and the Zera Shimshon is going to give three explanations as to what Yaakov meant when he responded. Yavor no Adoni lifnei avdo. Yaakov's response, as recorded in the Torah, was, pass in front of my master, please pass in front of me, your servant, and go ahead. Tol olamcha techila. Take your world first. Klomar, this means to say, since you already have holiness in your head, you need to be the head. You need to be and have power in this world. So go ahead in the world and take your portion of olam hazeh. Just like the head goes in front of the body. The head, it controls the body. And Yaakov concedes and says to Esav, I can't take away all the holiness from you. You're the rosh, you're the head, you're in control. Go ahead and use that to enjoy this world to the fullest. That's the first explanation the Zera Shimshon offers to what Yaakov meant when he said, you go ahead in front of me. Inami, next paragraph. Alternatively, another explanation. Kach amar lo Yaakov. This is what Yaakov was saying to Esav. Ani misratze shetitol olamcha dafka. I want that you will only take your world. Dahainu oso hachelik shel hakedusha shetzarech lecha b'tzimtzum. Meaning you should be limited to the little bit of holiness that you need in a minimum amount. Kedei shetehane me'olam hazeh, that allows you to live and benefit from this world. Aval eini rotze shetitol yoser, but I don't want you to take any more mima shetzarech la'olamcha than what you need for your world, olam hazeh. V'zehu ma she'ani rotze la'akev, and that is what I'm trying to prevent. So this means that Yaakov said to Esav, you're right, I am trying to hold you back, but I'm not trying to hold you back from having a little bit, the minimum amount of kedusha that you need. I'm just trying to make sure you don't take any more. In other words, I'm on to you, Esav, and I know you're trying to take more and more kedusha and use it for nefarious purposes. But that's what I'm trying to prevent. But I'm not going to try and prevent you from keeping the little bit, the tzimtzum, the little bit of minimum kedusha that you need to enjoy this world. Inami, alternatively, one more possible explanation. Kach amar lo Yaakov, this is what Yaakov said to Esav, bevadai she'enani yochol la'akev al yodcha. I am definitely not going to be able to prevent you, shelo tivla eze nitzot shel kedusha, from swallowing up, so to speak, sparks of holiness. Shahari kach gozra chachmoso yisborach be'ez habriya, because this is what Hashem decreed. This is how Hashem set up the world at the time of creation. Shahaklipa tihiyah bolas mehakadusha, that the forces of impurity can swallow up and absorb from the holiness, the forces of purity, lefi maseh b'nei adam, according to how people act. Depending on how people act in the world, their actions can give power, so to speak, to the forces of impurity to grab onto and steal some of the holiness, some of the forces of purity. But after the forces of impurity absorb some purity, the forces of purity have the right to try and get it back. Kedichsiv, as the pasuk says, Hu Yeshuv Charosh, like we saw by the snake and Adam Arishon, he will step on your head, meaning human beings, the forces of purity can try and get back the forces, the kedusha that was taken by the forces of impurity, kenizkar la'el, as we explained before. V'zehu mashani oseh lecha. And that is what I'm doing to you. Yaakov says to Esav, Litol es sheli mitachas yadecha. You're right, I'm trying to take back the forces of purity from you, Esav, but I'm only trying to take them back because that's my right, because you stole them in the beginning. I'm not trying, and I can't make it so that it's impossible for you to absorb any holiness. Hashem set up the world that you can do that. But I'm trying to take back as much as I can of what you're taking. V'zehu, and this is what it means, tol olamcha techila bevlias hanitzotzos. Take your world in the beginning by swallowing up nitzotzos, ve'achar kach ani akabetz hanidochim, and afterwards I will try to gather back and take back the dispersed nitzotzos shel kedusha, sparks of holiness that you took and that weren't yours to begin with. So the Zera Shimshon, we'll stop here, but the Zera Shimshon gives three interpretations at this point to what Yaakov Avinu meant when he said to Esav, pass on in front of me and take your world, take this world first. What did he mean by that? Those were the three possible explanations to that. And the Zera Shimshon goes on to go into great depth into why Yaakov brought up the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And we can look forward, God willing, to learning that perhaps next year or whenever it is the next time we get back and are able to return to this piece. So I can't do a full summary, but just to briefly recap, Yaakov and Esav in the Psukim, as we said, seemingly have a very straightforward little conversation, a little dialogue. Esav says, hey, would you like me to come with you and accompany you? Yaakov says, no, that's okay. You go ahead of me. I have to walk much more slowly than you do. We'll meet up later. That's the conversation. According to the Medrash Yalkut Shimoni, it was a much deeper and more powerful conversation with monumental implications and ramifications. Esav is saying to Yaakov, if you keep doing what you're doing, I'm going to end up with a portion of the world to come, which I don't think you want. And Yaakov is saying, no, I definitely don't want that. And I want you to move ahead and focus just on this world and leave the next world to me. And exactly what Yaakov meant and how he described what he wanted to, his plan, so to speak, to Esav was it can be at least understood in the three different ways that we saw at the end of this first section. Yasher Koch for joining in the Zera Shimshon learning this week. We look forward, God willing, to joining together and learning the Zera Shimshon on next week's Parsha.